right, Matteo, here's the new and improved tower crane. The jib is longer, and what's that thing out there?
Over here we have the trolley, and what it does is by turning this wheel over here we can bring it in or out.
Beautiful. Do it a few times. I want to. So the line goes around the pulley there. Keep going. Attaches to the underside of the trolley on both sides. And goes around another wheel, which is connected to a windlass. Okay. And it's got load 4 ball bearings underneath the trolley, and they ride in this track made of cherry wood, cut down on the friction. And then in the middle of the trolley is a line going down for the load, and that hooks on a couple more pulleys and goes down to the windlass, just like the windlass we had on all the other cranes. Okay, so let's hook on a double brick load, right?
Clutch of the crane is still the same, like the automatic brake we have here, so you're clicking.
And yeah, hook on the load, and then tell me about those pads you have underneath the outriggers.
Yep. So if we imagine this crane is sitting on asphalt, and it's 100 times heavier, 100 times bigger, and we had the same kind of outriggers without the pads, what would happen is, because these outriggers are so small, all the force of the crane gets shoved into the ground and digs into the asphalt, and it could potentially make it tip over. By having these pads, we distribute the weight evenly over a larger area, so it doesn't dig into the ground as much.
Good. Okay, so let's hook on a...
You hear the brake? That's just making sure the load doesn't drop.
Good. Now, can we slew the crane 180 degrees?
Let's see. Yep. We can rotate it all we want, or slew it.
Good. All right, go back where we came from. Lower the hook, and we'll attach a double brick load. Okay. So hook on a double brick. Oops. So the 2 bricks are 9.4 pounds. So we have to include the weight of the trolley, and that's another 5 pounds.
Do you have the lock for the trolley?
Yes. Okay.
Very important. Remember to lock off the trolley, otherwise it'll kind of slip towards us.
Okay.
There we go.
Good. Now, let's get the numbers. The big poster. It's the same poster we had last time. We have to make some changes. So the jib is longer. So the distance from the CG of the load to this pivot point is 20 inches. Actually, that's the same dimension we had before. But the distance from the CG of the boom to the pivot point is 13 inches instead of 8 inches. So let's run the numbers and see what the total torque is for that.
All right. For the load and the boom, or sorry, the jib, all we do is take the weight of the load plus a trolley, so 14.4 pounds, times by the distance of 20 inches, and that gets us 288 inch-pounds of torque. We take the torque of the jib, which is 5 pounds, and it's 13 inches away. So we multiply those together, we get 65 inch-pounds of torque. We now add those two numbers together, and we get 353 inch-pounds of torque for the entire right side of the crane.
353, okay. Now, let's take away the small poster.
Yep.
Okay, now the distance from the CG of the tower to the pivot point is 9 inches. And the distance from the CG of the counterweight is, instead of 18 inches, it's 24 inches. So let's see those, what the numbers give us.
Yep. So, same thing as last time, we just take the weight of the tower body, 23.25 pounds, times by the distance from the pivot point, 9 inches. We get 209 inch-pounds of torque. Now we do the same thing for the counterweight back here,
Let me see the
which is
weight.
5 pounds, and it's usually a brick is about 4.7 pounds,
Right,
but we have this piece of wood under it, so that makes it about 5 pounds.
good.
Multiplied by its distance away, which is 24 inches, we get 130 inch-pounds of torque. Add those together, we get 339 inch-pounds of torque.
So there's less torque on the crane side than on the load side.
Yep, so it should tip over, but there's a reason why it doesn't.
So pull those away.
Yeah.
So the numbers tell us it should tip over. But it didn't because, well, all the numbers are kind of crude. I don't have a very good scale to measure the weight of everything, and computing the distances from all the different pivot points is inaccurate, to say the least. So it should tip over, but it doesn't. And that's why I have a safety factor.
Yep.
Okay, so now the job is we have to land that load, that 2-brick load, where?
Somewhere over here.
So we have to slew it 180 degrees.
Slew means rotate.
Good. Now, when we slew it halfway, 90 degrees, what's going to happen?
Well, if it's supposed to tip over here, then that means it most definitely will when it's rotated 90 degrees. And that's because, if you remember last time, because the pivot point is closer to the center of gravity of the crane tower and the counterweight, it reduces the torque on this side, but increases the torque on this side.
Exactly.
So it'll tip over.
Definitely. So what can we do?
Well, now that we have this fancy trolley installed, we can just bring the load and the trolley closer to the pivot point. Yep.
Good.
Now the only thing we have to worry about is the fact that the trolley likes to lower the load when it's closer. Oops.
Good.
So just bring up the load and we're all good.
You locked off the trolley.
Yep.
High-tech locking system there, right?
It'll never fail.
Okay.
So now we slew it. And look at that. It doesn't tip over at all.
Okay.
And I think you can notice that the load is almost perfectly over the pivot point, which is not a lot of torque whatsoever.
Exactly.
So now we slew it more,
Okay.
and if need be, just drop the load.
Well, ideally, we'd trolley out.
One problem with that.
Yes, and we're having some technical difficulties operating the trolley. There we go.
I think you can notice that once it hits a certain point, the line starts to slip around this disc.
Yes.
It doesn't move along with the line.
We came up with some ideas to improve on this. Instead of using some pulley wheels and rope, and it's going to slip, we're going to use a sprocket from a bicycle and chain, and that should improve everything.
Yep. It won't have so much force back here. There's a lot of friction
A lot of tension
on this
there.
pulley wheel. And actually, if you notice, the entire all thread over here is actually bent from the amount of force.
Yes.
It's not too noticeable, but it is definitely bent.
Which means there's so much tension on that pulley wheel that the pulley wheel's barely turning.
All the force is going into pulling the all thread instead of rotating the wheel.
Exactly. So hopefully bicycles, chain, and sprocket will solve that problem.
Well, they never mentioned how far away it has to be, so
That's true.
we'll just set it down over here.
Okay. So the foreman is happy. You completed the job.
Yep.
Okay.